Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Young Voices of the North podcast. My name is Namirembe, and I'm joined here by Eniola, and today we will be discussing, our opinions on expressing your values through protest. So there are many different movements that use protest to kind of express their opinions. There's things like veganism or like women's rights, different race groups, things like that. So Eniola, what's your without thinking about like specific groups, just overall, what's your opinion on protesting?
I feel like protesting can be a really great way to bring attention to what you're trying to say, especially to people who, like, maybe sometimes people are trying to protest in order to grab the attention of people with more power than them in higher places. And I feel like protesting can be a really great way to do that because you're kind of like disrupting their usual flow. So I feel like it can be a very great tool, but there's an extent where it should be stopped. For example, it shouldn't get violent. Like no one should be getting hurt and stuff like that.
No, I agree. I think protesting is like a good idea of getting attention, especially since it brings in like media and things like that. But there are cases where it does get extreme. But then I also feel like sometimes the extreme violence isn't even started by the people who started the protest. And it's actually started by sometimes the security that's there, like the law enforcement, which I feel like we did see a lot of during BLM back in 2020. Like a lot of the protests were peaceful. Like not to say that there were people who weren't doing like anything bad or anything like that, but a lot of times like tear gas was being thrown. Is that really necessary?
And my opinion on that is that I feel like since protesting isn't illegal, protesting is like your right, really. So I feel like the government and law enforcement should have more rules in place so that people can protest in a peaceful way without like having to use tear gas and stuff like that. Because if there were more rules in place, then we would have a specific line where we draw where the moment people start getting hurt, maybe that's when you have to like disrupt the protest. But like have specific laws, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially since there's such a double standard. Okay. So for anyone who's like maybe like outside Canada, although I feel like it was heard outside there too. It wasn't last year. It was the year before, I think. Or was it 2 years before? I cannot remember exactly. I don't know what's not coming to mind. But we had like that protest over like truckers having to be vaccinated. Remember? The Freedom Convoy. That's what it was. And they were like violent. They were like extremely violent. But law enforcement did like nothing because they're like, oh, well, they're like children there. They might get hurt. And they were like in Ottawa for days before they finally like cleared them out. But they didn't do anything. But then like I remember like, you know, like BLM, they did not hesitate to like break that thing up. So that's also why like, we need those rules because there's a double standard and it's pretty obvious what it is.
Yeah.
Not gonna say it, but I know y'all know what I'm talking about. But yeah.
One thing I feel like I've noticed, not even only in the realm of protests, there was also like I was watching, like I was kind of doing a lot of research, like just independently and watching some videos on like YouTube about like the drug rampage in America and how like in the 80s, 90s when drugs were a thing and it was mostly among like the Black community, how they immediately started arresting people and making it illegal. But the moment when it started being like mostly white people using drugs, they started instead being like, oh, we should instead start trying to help people trying to get off drugs. So I feel like that's another instance where double standards are used. So I feel like I agree there should really be specific laws in place to make sure that these double standards aren't happening anymore.
Especially since some movements are like, how do I say this? Like the intention isn't correct, if that makes sense. So like when you think of like different protests where it's like, oh, people are like advocating for like you know, like abortion or like something to do with race or like, you know, gender sexuality rights, because like whatever's in place or going to be in place is going to like actively harm their lives. That's one thing. But then if we use like the Freedom Convoy or like just even anti-vaxxers in general, for example, their reasoning isn't like really backed up by facts. It's more backed up by conspiracy theories, right?
Yeah.
So then it's like, do we allow that to happen? Because everyone knew that what they're like advocating for was like not, it wasn't factual, but then they still do have the right to protest. And like, so what do you think like we should do in those situations where it's like when you know something is like completely false, but they do have that right to like push for it?
Yeah. I feel like since, again, double standards. So I feel like even if you are protesting for something that may like, where most people would agree it's kind of wrong or something, you should still have the right to, you know? I don't know.
I guess that's fair.
I feel like anyone can come try to convince me otherwise. I'm open to other opinions. But like one thing is there's a lot of times where people aren't really doing anything wrong, but like since the majority of people disagree, then because maybe people are like, I'm not saying that specific example,
Yeah.
but maybe in the future there'll be another debate where people are thinking, let's go protest for something. And like in the grand scheme of things, it seems like what they're protesting for is right. But at the moment, it may seem like they're wrong.
That's true.
So I feel like anyone should be allowed to protest. And if you don't believe in it, then that's your own right. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions. Yeah. We were also going to talk a little bit about veganism, weren't we?
Oh, yeah. Like just, yeah. Because the thing with that is like, you know, like personally, I don't care. Like, and, you know, but then they're like the protests where they're like, oh, like meat is murder, all that kind of stuff. But then it's not really, again, backed up by facts where it's saying like, but then there are some things that I see where it's like actually should eat less meat because it's better for the environment. But at the same time, it's like a lot of like cultures, like they eat certain meats and things like that. And it never harmed their environment. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I feel like I'm perfectly fine with veganism. Like if you want to be vegan, that's your own choice. Honestly, I would even consider being vegan. I have considered it before. There's really nothing wrong with you wanting to be vegan. But I feel like trying to force your opinions on others. That's why I wanted to even bring up the topic of veganism. Because I feel like it's not as sensitive of a topic. Like if I were to bring up a different topic, then people would kind of get mad about it. So I feel like this isn't as sensitive. But that's why I brought it up. Why am I repeating myself? But I feel like this is just a great example of how everyone's entitled to their own opinions. And you don't have to force it on others. Like if you have a friend and you want them to maybe consider becoming vegan, that's perfectly fine. Like if someone were to come up to me and be like, you should consider being vegan, then I'd hear them out. But I feel like you don't have to disrupt the peace for it. You know, everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you're vegan, then I'm on your side, okay?
Yeah, I find that very fair as well. But then sometimes, like, when you think about it, like, think about, like, you know, like, I mean, these things happen now, but we'll think about, like, more, like, past, like, certain historical protests where it's, like, for example, people would protest against, like, having integrated schools. It's, like, do you think they had the right to have that opinion? Because we now would say, you know, that's, like, obviously, like, racist or whatever. And, but both sides have two different opinions. So then both sides protest for, you know, what they believe in. But do you think that in that case it's okay for the people who didn't want the integrated schools to have their opinions? Because they are entitled to one.
Yeah. I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinions.
But then what happens when the opinions are actually like harmful to other groups?
Okay. How about we look at it this way? Like, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but at the end of the day, it's like the law that counts. So, let's think of an example. Let's say you hate having pineapples on pizza. You're entitled to your opinion, and that means if you go to Domino's and you try ordering a pizza, you may choose not to have pineapples on it. But that doesn't mean you have to go to other people who are eating pineapples on pizza and start berating them and being like, how dare you have pineapples on your pizza, and start ripping the pineapples off their pizza, you know? So, like, in that case of people voting against integrated schools, I feel like we all agree that that opinion was wrong.
But those people didn't think that.
Yeah, they didn't think that. And
because like I feel like that whole idea kind of works for like mild topics when you think of things like that.
yeah,
It's kind of like, because then if you give the idea that, well, if they don't want that, then they can just have their own school. That's still kind of like, okay, can you imagine if that's like the same idea? Like, you'd be like, oh, you could go to the integrated schools, you could go to like the non-integrated schools, and that's still kind of like, oh. So, yeah, so we kind of have to find a way to like navigate the whole idea of like, when you're entitled to your opinions, but some opinions are more harmful than others, and I think we need to kind of address that, or like be aware of that.
Yeah. So I feel like at that point, it's more the government's duty, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. But then all of them also have their own opinions.
That is true.
And often governments can either completely side with the public or completely oppose the public.
Yeah. I feel like that's something we see a lot these days, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Isn't TikTok getting banned? Oh, well, that's not the topic, I guess. But
no, but like in the U.S., like I think it was like the House passed a bill or something.
Yeah.
And usually whatever the U.S. does, Canada does next.
Yeah.
So are we all gonna... I just remember when it was originally gonna get banned, and that's why all these apps came up with like Snapchat Spotlight and Instagram Reels and Facebook Reels. So are we just gonna resort to that now? Because I'm gonna be honest, I think I don't know if it's just me, but Reels are kind of unhinged. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. They're like different than TikTok. Yeah.
Even though they're just TikToks posted on Instagram. They're like different vibes and everything.
Yeah.
But then I guess, think of it this way. If we do... I don't know if they started this in the U.S., but I'm sure it's going to start. If people start protesting against the ban of TikTok, do you think that's like valid?
Protesting against the ban?
Yeah.
Protesting against the ban is definitely valid. But I feel like the government should learn more to listen to, like, the people, you know? Because even then, like, if you don't listen to the people who elected you, they're not going to elect you next time. So I feel like the government... So while we are all protesting and trying to make our opinions heard, I feel like it's the government's duty to actually listen, you know? But at the same time, that can be destructive, for example, when people are protesting for the wrong thing.
Yeah.
That's why I feel like this is such a complicated topic, isn't it? Like, there's no right or wrong. And again, everyone's entitled to their opinions. So while I may be thinking protesting is okay so long as you're not hurting anyone, like maybe some of you listeners may think protesting should be banned altogether. And that's perfectly fine. Honestly, I wish someone would just appear right now and try to convince me otherwise. You know, I'd love to like have a debate on that. Also, I'm kind of sick right now, in case you guys can tell. So sorry about that.
I love how you put up the peace sign knowing no one can see it.
Oh. We need to, like, get a camera in here. We should get a camera in here. Maybe I should, like, start getting, like, an AI voice to come out of nowhere and be like,
oh, perfect.
Eniola, put up the peace sign.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. All right. So do you have anything else to say on this topic? Okay. Then I'm just going to say, yeah, overall, I think protesting is I think it's better to have it than to not, honestly.
Yeah.
Because, like, we did discuss, like, how sometimes people protest for the wrong things, and, like, some opinions are, like, harmful. to others and things like that. But I think it's better that we live in a world where we have it than where we don't.
Yeah.
Because, like, could you imagine if we were, like, just forever silenced? Like, that'd be, like, at least we're making it known, like, whatever we're advocating it for. So even if it doesn't work, it's out there, people know about it, things like that.
Yeah. And another thing I want to add is that when you do have different opinions than people around you, that you should always still learn to respect their opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I see a lot of people, and it makes me really sad when I maybe see on the internet people who maybe spoke out for having a different opinion and then they got their car vandalized.
Yeah.
So don't do that, guys. When someone has a different opinion, maybe that's your opportunity to maybe send them a message or something being like, oh, maybe I disagree. But that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions. So don't do anything hateful.
Yeah, don't do anything like that. Even this was, 3 episodes ago, I think, when we discussed the whole what's going on in the Middle East with Israel and Hamas and all those things. Like, we expressed our opinions, but we're not going around harming people who disagree with us.
Yeah.
So that's a good example of, like, because technically it's like a form of protest, I guess, making a podcast about it.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not going around harming people who disagree. We're also not spreading misinformation. We did our research beforehand as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I guess that's all for this episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will see you next month.
Bye, guys. I waved, by the way.